All right, so please go ahead. Yep.
Thank you. And I was telling Eileen, I'm extremely grateful to her for the invitation, and obviously to all of you for taking a little bit of time out of your busy days to come and listen to me talk. The talk it's pretty basic. My hope is that you'll walk away from today with maybe at least one thing that you didn't know about what NASA was doing in terms of ocean science, or at least maybe something you didn't know that NASA was doing as a whole. And also where to find some data if you're interested in, or at least have my contact information in case there were any questions that you wanted to ask. And so at least my hope is that you walk away with something that you didn't know, or that you hadn't anticipated. So I'll be happy and satisfied if that happens. I think everybody can see my title slide, and this picture is dear and near to my heart because it's actually our Earth Day poster from 2024. Every year, NASA generates an Earth Day poster. So when April 22nd rolls around, NASA puts out an Earth Day poster. And last year's theme, very appropriately, was the ocean. And basically, the tagline was "Water touches everything." And so we have phenomenal artists. I love to brag about them because they really are spectacular. If you've ever seen the media that NASA generates, it truly is mind blowing, which is a great tool to bring in, especially the younger generation. This is an ocean color image, an image of what our ocean looks like from space. And the artist utilized or modified, what the clouds, it doesn't look like whales, but this is where the artist comes in. So she took those clouds and modified them so that it would look like whales and fish. And at the very heart of it is our newest PACE satellite, which I'll talk about a little bit in a second. Okay. So for those of you that maybe don't know NASA, the one thing that underpins us is the utilization of remote sensing. We are a science and technology agency, and we can go to this slide. The one thing that sets us aside from other agencies, like for example NSF, is that for everything that we do, it is underpinned by satellite remote sensing. I work in the Earth Science Division, and I'll show you in a little bit. In 2 slides, you'll see how NASA is structured, at least in the headquarters piece. And this is what our Earth Science fleet looks like. So every day we do groundbreaking science that is aided by these satellites that are taking truly the pulse of our planet. We have satellites that look at the atmosphere, that look at the ocean, that look at radiation, that look at land. And so when we put all of this together, we can actually start to understand not just how the planet is changing, but also how all the different systems across the Earth are interconnected. We also rely on the International Space Station for some instruments. And most of the times what ends up going to the space station are instruments that are kind of test instruments. And they've actually provided some really phenomenal data. And for example, one of the ones that are looking at vegetation, both JEDI and EcoStress, have been truly remarkable to understand the California fires. EcoStress has looked at temperatures and was able to map the edges and borders of those fires. JEDI has looked at vegetation height, and so we can look at how vegetation is changing. Are there clearings that are happening that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise if it wasn't from the vantage point of space? And then EMIT has been actually a pretty nice bonus because the prime mission, and I'll talk about it at the end of the presentation, EMIT initially was set out to look at minerals on the Earth's surface, and it turned out to be so much more, and even have applications for aquatic sciences. So I did promise I was going to tell you a little bit how NASA was structured, just so you have a bit of a better understanding if you didn't. As I mentioned, I sit in the Earth Science Division, but the Earth Science Division is just a piece within the Science Mission Directorate, which has all these other divisions. We love to work closely with our other divisions. That is also the other nice advantage of being at NASA, is that the Earth Science Division is really thinking about Earth, and that is one of the mandates that we have at NASA. It's not just space exploration for peaceful uses, it's actually the understanding of Earth as our home for the betterment of humanity. And so we like to brag about that. We look at the most important planet of all, which is true. And so we, within the Science Mission Directorate, we also work with a lot of NASA centers, which are spread across the country. And we also try to address the priorities of the administration, which now is in flux. So we expect that there's going to be new priorities coming up soon that will help us kind of better direct our research so that we can answer those priorities. Back in 2023, our Earth Science Division put out what was called the Earth Science to Action Strategy. And that whole point was to articulate what is that we do within the division. And what was articulated in that actions or in that strategy was that we have the foundational science that is coming through the Earth observations that we have, but that it doesn't just stay there. It actually it grows with each processing of the data and with the development of each application. And so it really is trying to integrate that scientific knowledge and deliver trusted information based on that knowledge. And that is really where NASA's sweet spot is. It's the high quality data that is collected and the unbiased generation of results that help with decision making. And there's a link for that Earth Science Action Strategy. And so this is the virtuous pyramid, like I call it. Now, one of the key things within that pyramid is it's all nice, foundational science all the way to application, great. But there's a key element here that is really important, which is that return back to the foundational science, because we are measuring day in and day out the pulse of our planet. And we do that so that we can better understand how our planet is changing, so that life is sustainable. This is the only planet where we know there's life, that life can actually thrive. And we have to make sure that we protect it for our sake. And so it's important to understand where the foundational science can be improved so that we then have better measurements of our planet and can then lead to better applications. So within the Earth Science Division, there are 4 areas. Flight is the piece that takes care of all of our missions. And so it's not just airplanes. When I initially joined NASA, I was like, wow, why is it called flight? Well, it's actually the satellites. NASA does have a nice fleet of airplanes. I'm an oceanographer, so I'm a little biased. I think ships are the best, but NASA does like to fly a lot of instruments. And it has its advantages because it is a stepping stone between what you're seeing on Earth and then what you would see with a satellite. So our flight program takes care of everything that has to do with satellites in orbiting instruments like the ones on the space station. Research and analysis is, as the name suggests, this is our foundational research. So that kind of bottom step in that virtuous pyramid. Earth action is what comes above this research and analysis. So it truly is the connection between the research, the foundational science, and how does that help anyone, all of our different end users that we have on a planet. And then we also have technology, which focuses on providing foundational support for the innovation. And so new sensors, new ways in which we can measure something, new approaches, all of that is funded through our technology office. And so the OBB program, for those that don't know it, is truly focusing, I sit within the research and analysis part. So it is truly foundational research that is focused on understanding and predicting how our ocean, everything that has to do with biology, ecology, and biochemistry, how that is going to change. NASA is the foundation, are the remote sensing measurements. However, we really depend on in situ measurements to also validate our satellite images. And I'll talk about that in a second in the framework of PACE. And so it truly is an end-to-end way in which we can study our planet, and in particular our ocean. And so we don't we don't just stop at understanding why is ecology or biochemistry changing in the ocean. We really try to understand also what are the feedbacks, what are the drivers of some of these change. And this is what truly excites me when I put out a solicitation. Um, it's all the ideas and all the new directions really come from the community. We go to meetings, we listen to you talking about this amazing science, and especially highlighting the gaps that we have in understanding. And these are some of the hearing you talk about some of the key places where you need more investments, where you need to be able to study these problems that haven't been answered. That is what inspires us to put out the solicitations to try to address those gaps in understanding, because we really do need to understand how our planet is changing and be ready to react to it so that, again, we can be good stewards of our home. We published about a couple of years ago, I want to say, I can't keep track of time, what we know as our science vision. And this was a community led effort that is built around 5 grand challenges that link together science questions that the OBB program and the OBB community is thinking over the next decade. So that is a little bit of that is input that we use and we look at when we're thinking about how are we gonna develop the program. What are some of the things that we need to pay attention over the next decade? The other piece of information that we utilize when we're thinking about what kind of science we should be investing is the decadal survey. This is something that is executed by the National Academies of Science, that provides NASA with direction in terms of where the agency should go for over the next decade, in terms of missions of science, that really are going to enable the better understanding of our home planet. The last decadal survey that we received was back in 2017, so we're about halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through. We already did our midterm review of the decadal survey. And so we're already starting to think about the next decadal survey, thinking that it's going to come around, 3-4 years from now. Aquatic sciences over the last decadal survey was, it was kind of represented, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in the current scheme of missions. But as we're thinking about the next decadal survey, we need to make sure that aquatic sciences are ready for the next decadal survey, and that whatever missions or science priorities emerge from that decadal, that our aquatic ecosystems are well represented. And this is with the forethought that we have to make sure that we're taking the right measurements so that our ecosystems and the services they provide remain healthy for future generations. And to that point, we did a small exercise recently to look at what are some of the OBB benefits that are coming out. And most of the science that we found obviously is in coastal regions. Our program is not that big, but just with very small investments, there's a significant return that comes back to the taxpayers. And it isn't a direct return necessarily, but it is foundational science. It is an understanding of how sargassum works, for example, in the Caribbean or Florida, how to prevent, how to predict. And sometimes those very small investments of OBB science really have a significant impact that help us understand how to better prepare and how to curb some of the issues that some of our aquatic ecosystems are facing. Harmful algae blooms is another one. And I'll give you another example, which is kelp. This is some work that Cal Kavanaugh and Tom Bell have developed over the past few years. And one of the really interesting events that they've captured through some of the research is the collapse of the kelp in the California region. And this has been tied to changes in the temperature of the water, currents. And so quantifying the amount of kelp that was lost and then potentially the subsequent result and which species were more resilient than others is extremely important if you think about how important the kelp canopy is, not just for the different species that depend on it. So we're talking about biodiversity, but also some of the resources that come out of those kelp forests. And so these kinds of studies are absolutely foundational when it comes to looking at our fast changing planet. And so I talked about the Earth Science Fleet. What you're seeing here now is our Ocean Color Science Fleet. And I use the term ocean color a little bit loosely because not all of these sensors measure just ocean color. There are sensors that measure other variables, including sea level height, or sea level. And there are other missions that are also coming down the line that are going to be able to give us more information about the ocean and ocean properties that are not just relying on ocean color, which has been a foundational quantity as of today. But we're really understanding now that if we wanted to observe our planet holistically, we need to move beyond ocean color. And obviously, our moment of pride and what has made us really, really happy over this past year is PACE.
My 10,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. Full power engines and liftoff of the Falcon 9 and PACE, helping keep pace with our ever-changing ocean and atmosphere. The hope is once they get those solar arrays deployed, a critical moment, they're going to be looking to get power on it. There goes PACE.
payload separation confirmed.
Off into space on its own, flying free.
So that was when PACE launched a year and 2 days ago. So PACE just turned one last Saturday. And this was the last time we had eyes on PACE, but PACE has had eyes on us ever since. And it has been an absolute joy to be able to receive data from this amazing instrument. So I'm going to take a few minutes to walk you through why we love PACE so much and why this has been turning out to be such a revolutionary instrument. PACE is composed of 3 instruments, actually. It has the ocean color instrument, which is, very apt for its name. It specifically measures ocean color. And it is a hyperspectral radiometer, and I'll mention what the differences are with our previous radiometers in a second. And then it has 2 added polarimeters that look at the atmosphere. And one of the goals of PACE was not just a revolutionary ocean color instrument, but it was also meant to better understand that interplay between the ocean and the atmosphere, because it's like a chicken and the egg problem. What drives what? And this has been a question that we've had, for decades. And how does one feed into the other? And so both the HARP and the SPEX1 polarimeters are going to help answer some of those questions. So some of the amazing things about PACE is that we really are moving from multispectral to hyperspectral, and you'll see a figure that will show you just how amazing this is. It remains the only polar orbiter that looks at our planet daily or almost daily, maximum every 2 days, which is extremely important because our ocean is constantly changing. It is the first time that we have UV bands in an ocean color sensor that is going to be able not just to improve what we are observing in the atmosphere, because OCI, even though it measures the ocean, that's its primary mission, it has to look through the atmosphere too. So there's also data that's coming back about the atmosphere from the OCI instrument, and it is looking at UV in the ocean. And then I mentioned the polarimeters are adding that dimensionality to the atmosphere. And so all of this really is making this observatory a truly phenomenal platform to observe the ocean and the atmosphere. So what are some of the things that we can look from PACE? So we have from the top of the atmosphere, and it's funny because I laugh at this picture when they put it. You just got a bunch of clouds, which is interesting because passive sensors like PACE cannot look through clouds, which is why it's so important to have something active like a LiDAR. But anyway, so you got the clouds. So you're looking at the clouds. You're looking at the aerosols. So you're looking at this entire atmospheric contribution, and then you're coming down to the water, which is truly important. So yeah, aerosols, black carbon. This is important for air quality. So PACE is going to be providing some really cool data. It already is regarding when you have fires. What do you have? What kind of particles do you have? What kind of air quality metrics do you have? Is it safe to be outside to breathe? It also provides information on clouds, cloud composition. And very interestingly, what is the interplay between the clouds and the ocean? What is the role of the ocean in actually seeding cloud formation? The different polarimeters can also provide information on the surface of the ocean, depending on how flat it is or how rough it is. So you get to identify things kind of floating at the surface, for instance, oil slicks. And then when we come into the interior of the ocean, based on what kind of signal you get back, you can understand how the light is penetrating, what is coming back, and then what kind of light do you have available for your phytoplankton that are in the ocean. Because it is hyperspectral, we're actually now able to determine what kind of phytoplankton is there, because not all phytoplankton are created equal. So we're going to have the ability to actually distinguish communities of phytoplankton, which is really important when you're thinking about fisheries or when you're thinking about harmful algal blooms. We can look at what kind of particulate matter is floating in there. If it's shallow enough, we can look at bathymetry, which is really interesting. And then obviously we also have the one of the things that PACE is ocean and atmosphere, but it is providing some absolutely beautiful land products. And I should have thrown one in here, but I didn't, and I forgot. Which is it's really blowing everyone's minds. And actually the land products were ready before the aquatic products, because it was so exciting. Everybody was like, oh my gosh. So it is really it's quite amazing what PACE is producing. And with that UV band, we can also look at dissolved stuff in the water. So as I promised, I wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what, like, truly how monumental this change is, because ever since the Coastal Zone Color Scanner back in 1978, when it was launched, we've been looking at the ocean in just certain pieces and in just certain places. And so we've been able to put a story together that tells us there's phytoplankton. We've been able to develop certain algorithms that exploit those different bands that we have from the multispectral instruments, but it's never the whole story. And this is what actually is going to allow us to distinguish one species of phytoplankton from the other. And it really is turning out to be quite exciting. And I've talked a little bit about some of the applications that PACE is going to have in terms of air quality. When there's oil leaks, there's the possibility of looking at that. So it really, and because of the high revisit time, it really is providing eyes on a rapidly changing system. And when you have something like a disaster, you have PACE that is going to be there to be able to observe what's happening both on land, the water, and the atmosphere. This is an animation that was developed for Earth Day last year. And these are actual PACE data. So this is just kind of your true color image that you would see. And now as PACE stops over Florida and zooms in, you can see what your traditional ocean color would look like. But then as we start processing for specific species of phytoplankton, we can start to discern, where is one species versus another. And so here you have two species of phytoplankton, the Pleurococcus, which is very abundant. You have eukaryotes, you have picoeukaryotes, and these are based on sizes and based on the different pigments that they have. And you can start to see what kind of distribution they may have. And our hope is that once we have validated the data better, we're going to be able to really apply this to different parts of the world and start to understand things like, how does a HAB develop? Can we detect it? Can we predict it? And these are some figures from the two polarimeters that can actually see smoke coming off from land. And you can look at different aerosol sizes and provide information about what the air quality is like. And so this is just a global image of the whole Earth, both on land and the ocean. And I mentioned PACE is really doing truly wonderful on land, which is a relief because our MODIS instruments are they're at the end of their life, and a lot of people depend on those to be able to understand how terrestrial ecosystems are changing. So PACE really is coming in also and fill a niche and a gap in that regard. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. And so this is what you would get with your UV band. And so you can actually look at color dissolved organic matter and dissolved organic carbon, and you can actually start to understand where you have absorption by phytoplankton, absorption by detritus, or absorption by the color dissolved organic matter, which can be an indicative of, for example, river plumes or when you have resuspension. And so you actually start differentiating what is what from a satellite image. And these are some of the figures of the data from our SPECS instruments, our polarimeters. So they can give you concentrations on sulfates and nitrates in the atmosphere. You see a lot of them over highly populated areas. You can look at things like black carbon and start putting those into context when it comes to human health. And then from the OCI instrument, I mentioned that it also is looking at the atmosphere. You can look at other aerosols like or dust that flies from desert regions that also impacts air quality and can have a connection with ocean fertility. So that is also a place that we're looking into, is what is this relationship between deposition of particles from the atmosphere and blooms. And one example is what is happening with, for example, the California fires, or what happened with the Australian fires, and how that kind of burned biomass that ended up in the atmosphere is fertilizing the ocean. Considering that we are anticipating a warmer planet, more arid, and more frequent fires. Okay, so I mentioned, we love our data from space, but we cannot trust it blindly. And this is where NASA really excels at being very thorough when we put an instrument in space, when we take measurements. We are very thorough when it comes to making sure that what we are saying it's sedum or chlorophyll, it actually is what it is. And so over the next 4 years, and it started last year after PACE launched, we have a validation campaign going across the world to take a bunch of measurements, both on the atmosphere and in the ocean, and make sure that we're comparing what is actually in the ocean and the atmosphere with the measurements that PACE is generating. And so the map that you see in your screen shows the different places where we have validation efforts ongoing. And we're very proud of all the scientists that are actually taking these measurements, because it's not easy. It's a lot of work. And you have to be very methodical, and you have to be very careful, and the data have to be turned in within 30 to 60 days, because we have metrics that we have to meet with PACE validation. So our deepest thanks to all of our scientists that are taking these measurements and helping us validate PACE data. We did complete a field campaign that was it had aircraft and ship measurements at the same time, which would be analogous to what PACE is truly looking at. And that was last September, and it was a month-long effort, and the data are absolutely beautiful. And we are doing this also collaborating with some of our European partners for a new satellite that they launched, which is called EarthCare. That is also complementary. It's an active sensor, so it's a LiDAR that is taking measurements of the atmosphere, and it's complementing some of the measurements that PACE is taking. So we love to collaborate with our partners. And then also extremely important is our system that carries calibration. And these are systems that are developed with very strict scientific standard of measurements. And so, for example, NIST is involved in one of the systems, which they're very well characterized. And so every time the sensor goes over them, we can take those data and utilize it as this is more towards the calibration side, not the validation. And so we currently have been using for a really long time the MOBI system, which NOAA has been maintaining off of Hawaii. And so these two new sensors that PACE developed, these two new SVC platforms, are supposed to augment that MOBI site and help not just PACE Ocean Color, but all Ocean Color instruments that all of our sister agencies across the world are developing. So very, very cool stuff. And just to summarize in terms of what PACE has been doing, it really has varied interdisciplinary applications that we expect. It's just a year old, but already is kind of blowing our minds. And so we really expect it to be able to feed into this big enterprise that we have at our planet, our blue economy, and really help with ecosystem management and also keeping our ocean and our people safe and healthy. But why do we need to continue to take measurements? I mean, we kind of know what the planet is doing, right? Or we could just have, when we have something happening, we could just take, a measurement. That is fine and dandy. But that really does not help us understand how our planet is changing. And that is actually fundamental for us to know where we're going. And what you're seeing here is 20 years of chlorophyll animations. And so you see chlorophyll on land and you see kind of chlorophyll in the ocean. You can see the major rivers that are coming out. And this is mostly MODIS data. CWIS and MODIS data merged together from 1997. And so it is only by taking these continuous measurements that we can start saying that something is changing. And nothing says change like our Earth temperature. These are data from the Ceres instrument that has been taking measurements since 1997. And so we really have a long time series. And if we didn't have that sustained time series, we wouldn't be able to really make any kind of connection between the change and the actual long-term trend, which is our climate. And so it is these kind of constant, uninterrupted measurements that make the difference and that help us understand how our planet is changing, which is critical for life. And that gives rise to other products that NASA generates, which is, for example, how much our planet has warmed. And so this animation it's a modeling because it goes back to the early 1900s. There were no satellites back then. But the later part of the record does have the series measurements incorporated. And so you can start seeing how our planet is becoming more and more yellow and then more and more red, which is actually, it just makes me hot every time that I see it because it's a little alarming. But if it wasn't for the constant measurements that we take, we wouldn't be able to understand how the planet is changing. And this is one of the unique places where NASA comes in. And for the ocean, it's even more complex. What you see in this slide are a couple of papers that talk about the time of emergence and the time at which we really have some turning points. And so Stephanie Henson back in 2017 published a paper that looked at different variables. You had your physical variable, but then you had some biochemical variables. And I should have labeled it, and I just realized I didn't. I apologize. But the gist of it is that when you have something like sea surface temperature, you can actually start seeing patterns emerge a lot faster. When you throw biology into the mix, it is much more difficult to actually see the patterns emerge because biology is complex on its own. And so the amount of time that you would need to constantly, you cannot stop your measurement, to constantly measure that variable in order for you to see a pattern emerge or what is the trend is much longer. And this is why sustaining these kinds of global observations through satellites are so essential. We cannot have interruptions in our record because then that's going to set us back and it's going to make the time of emergence a lot longer. And those are some of the things that do keep me up at night is how are we going to make sure that we continue these kinds of measurements, which are essential for us to understand how things are going to change and how do we prepare for those changes? How do we face the challenge and make sure that that we are ready and that our ecosystems are ready and that we as humans are ready? And this is, and I had to throw this in just because I love time series, as if you hadn't noticed, and because Cariaco was one of the key time series here. It's not just satellites that need to be maintained, it's also in situ time series because they do have that three-dimensional aspect. And we are working hard to try to make sure that we can see from space into the ocean. This is where LiDARs come in. But ecological time series are really critical to make sure that we have that complete ecosystem understanding of how the ocean is changing. And this paper, it's pretty old. It's from 2015 from Nick Bates in Bermuda. And they looked at dissolved inorganic carbon. So basically, how's the ocean acidifying? And it was, it was unequivocal. No matter where you measured, you could actually see acidification in every single one of the time series. And we're talking about, 25 years of data. So these are the kind of data that help us understand how the ecosystems are changing, and what can we do to be ready, and what kind of impacts are those going to have on our ecosystem services. Another example of, and this is where satellites really are handy and very precise, is, for example, measuring sea level change. And it not just sea level change, but also changes in glaciers, which are, and we measure this with radar. And so it's important, and sea surface altimetry, and it's important because when you have glaciers that are shrinking, like pretty much every glacier in our planet, that is also water resources that are shrinking. And so this is important when we're trying to make predictions about water resources, is important to make sure that we understand what are the changes in the glaciers that are happening. And then that feeds into sea level change, which for coastal regions, and especially certain areas of the world, are pretty critical. Some islands in the Pacific already are facing complete drowning. And so that means like you have to completely just move that entire island somewhere else. And so, as you can imagine, that causes all kinds of geopolitical issues. And so the globe spinning, what you're seeing there is actually sea surface altimetry. But we have in the image to the right, it's our record of sea level change. And you can see where the satellite record comes in, which is actually extremely precise. And it's really providing really good data that complements the in situ measurements, the tide gauges that we've been taking for over 100 years. And we're really happy because, so PACE launched, there we go. PACE launched in 2024, but in December of 2023, in collaboration with the French Space Agency, the SWOT instrument was launched. And SWOT is surface water and ocean topography. And so SWOT is again, it's another altimeter, but it measures ocean change or change on land at a pretty fine scale that is completely unprecedented. And so it allows us to see in the ocean eddies and changes of ocean topography in scales that we hadn't been able to see before. What excites me more about SWOT is actually being able to see rivers on land, which some rivers are not even gauged. And so understanding what the changes in river fluxes is very difficult, which is something that SWOT is actually changing. So we're really excited about SWOT. And then the other thing that we can measure from space is surface salinity, which, again, it's really important and actually has a connection with precipitation. So depending on sea surface salinity, for example, in the Atlantic, you can actually have an inkling on whether you're going to have a wet or a dry season, for example, in Africa. So it's a pretty cool measurement, and it's quite interesting how interconnected it is with other climate workings. And so I don't know, I've been yapping a lot. And I promise I'm wrapping up soon. So these are just some examples so you get an idea of all the other really cool stuff that Earth observations look at from NASA. So we talked about, how both of our ocean kind of realms, but we also look at changes in vegetation. We look at fires. The California fires are kind of pretty fresh in all of our minds. We look at precipitation. We look at aerosols. groundwater storage, and obviously, how our planet is changing. And in the atmosphere, we have a whole program of atmospheric sciences that are looking at air quality, concentrations of greenhouse gases, and all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so that's what we do. What is coming up in the horizon? And I'll try to be brief. As I mentioned, the decadal survey initially gave us direction on where we should go over the next decade. And that kind of condensed into 5 different missions. The aerosol clouds, convection and precipitation, ACCP, which has been kind of blended into one mission, and now adopted another one, which I'll talk in a second. Mass change, which is moving forward. Surface deformation and change, which is now taking the form of NISAR, which is a joint India and US mission, which was already in the works. And then the surface biology and geology mission is the one where kind of the oceans fits in, that looks at, as the name suggests, the surface, ocean, and land, and geology. SBG has a footprint that's a lot finer than PACE. And so PACE is about 100 kilometers. SBG is much smaller. It's about 30 to 60. And so the revisit time is not going to be quite as good as PACE, but it really is complementary when we talk about looking at finer scale, and especially the coastal zone. That's where we anticipate SBG to be quite critical. SBG has 2 pieces, has a thermal mission, and then it has the kind of the optical, piece. And so the 2 of them are what make up the whole SBG mission. And those are going to be launched in between 2028 and 2032. So they're coming, not too fast, but it takes a long time to develop missions, which sometimes it's kind of hard to grasp. I mentioned EMIT in one of my first slides in the International Space Station. And again, EMIT initially was commissioned to look at mineral dust sources from the space station, and how that airborne dust was impacting climate. However, EMIT actually turned out to be a pretty cool radiometer. And so it was actually able to detect methane. And so it's been used to look at point sources of methane. And it has applications for the ocean. And because it is finer spatial resolution, it really is becoming more exciting for our aquatic community. And so now it has an extended mission. So typically stuff on the space station stays for their duration of their mission, and then, breaks my heart, it's actually thrown out in space because it's so expensive to bring it back. So it's shocking. But we've had so many absolutely amazing instruments in the International Space Station that they've stayed for much longer than their primary mission. And so EMIT is an example that it's going to be there for its extended mission. And now it's not just looking at dust, it's actually looking at greenhouse gas, and it's looking at aquatic targets. And so it's going to look at aquatic ecosystems, at biodiversity, water quality in coastal zones. So it's a baby SBG, or it's a precursor SBG, which is starting out to be pretty amazing. So we're very proud of our EMIT team, and all the data obviously are open, and you can navigate it, and you can search for it, and you can download it. It's always fun to go and play with those data. The other thing that is being ramped up is the Earth System Explorers, and these are smaller missions. So these are complementary to the 5 ESO missions. And so there are a number of missions that have been selected for a primary study. A couple of atmospheric, one that is ocean focused, and one that is focused on carbon. And so those are currently doing their primary studies, and then there's going to be a down selection to just 1 or 2 out of those initial 4. And then from the aquatic side, we continue to develop our Glimmer sensor, which it's really exciting because we haven't had a geostationary ocean color instrument. And this is what Glimmer is proposing to do. It's going to be parked looking at the Gulf of Mexico and measuring, every few minutes what the conditions in the Gulf of Mexico are. And it's not just the Gulf of Mexico, is it can look all the way down to the Amazon river mouth at certain times and all the way out to Hawaii. And so imagine just staring at one place and actually being able to see what the daily evolution of our coastal ecosystems or our open ocean ecosystems are. So it's pretty amazing. We're very excited to see Glimmer progress, because it's promising to provide us with really cool data and applications that are going to help a lot of coastal communities. And so Glimmer is anticipated to be launched no earlier than 2027. So the team's working really hard. And then what we're really excited about is the Luchip mission, which used to be the Caligula mission before it was renamed. And this is a LiDAR system. It's going to be the first LiDAR optimized for the ocean. It is part of the ACCP mission, so it is a LiDAR piece to that atmospheric mission, and but it has ocean capabilities, which we're very excited about, and it also is going to have applications for land and for cryospheric systems, so a lot of ice stuff. And we're just a little piece. The Italian Space Agency is taking the lead on this, so we're just contributing. So we wouldn't be NASA if we didn't do stuff with other divisions and if we didn't think big. And so one of the exciting things that we do is also think about ocean world. So what oceans exist beyond our planet? And the fun thing about this is that if you talk to a planetary scientist about ocean worlds, they're like, oh yeah, Earth is an N of one, and all we care to do is understand how Earth works so that we can, do our research elsewhere. Where we come at it with ocean worlds is we come at it so that we can understand our planet better. So when you do ocean world research, you're pretty unconstrained because it's pretty much out there. And so some of the approaches that scientists take when they're studying ocean worlds is, again, they don't bind themselves by the rules that we do already in our own planet. And sometimes that gives us insights into the workings of our own home in ways that we hadn't anticipated before. And so we love this partnership because it's helping us understand and leverage the knowledge and perspectives of ocean world research into our own home planet. And let's face it, this is the only planet that we know has life. And we have some pretty weird creatures in our own ocean. So we can think of them as our little aliens. We've done some work with the ocean world community. So we had a issue of oceanography published a number of years ago that has some pretty cool, it's pretty light reading if you're interested. It's very fun to think about what some of the things that we could be working together are, including some of the technologies. And so the ocean really offers us a challenge. This is why the ocean is not as well explored as the surface of Mars or the moon, because it's pretty tough. And so some of the technology that is developed here on planet Earth, it actually is pretty good for our ocean worlds. And so this kind of partnership and this kind of perspective is pretty useful for both the ocean world exploration and our own planet exploration. And actually I'll skip to the next slide just to save time. One of our next places where we're going is actually Europa, the moon of Jupiter that is believed to have a frozen ocean. And so Europa Clipper launched last October and is anticipated to arrive to Europa in 2032. So it's a bit of, it's not like launching something and orbiting our planet. There's space is pretty big. But it's really exciting because the Europa Clipper instrument or the Europa Clipper Observatory is leveraging on a lot of the science that has been developed for our own planet observation to actually try to understand what the ocean of Europa looks like. So they have a number of imaging systems that are going to look at geologic activity. They're going to try to look at ice thickness. And so think about how we measure our ice thickness. And there are places that we can't really measure ice thickness, even on Earth, really well. So this is really pushing the boundaries of science that are applicable in our own home planet. And I thought this actually animated, but it didn't. So it has a bunch of instruments that are going to really look very carefully. And this is just an orbiter. but they're going to look really carefully at how Europa is made. And especially the whole point is trying to answer the question, does Europa have a liquid ocean? How thick is that ice? Is that ocean salty? And does it have hydrothermal vents? Because as we know on our own planet, hydrothermal vents is where life, primordial life, actually began. Oh, there it is. It does spin. Okay, well. And so thinking about our own future and the future of our own planet, one of the next big things that the OBB program is planning on doing, and this is just an animation of how our sea ice is shrinking in the Arctic. And so one of the things that we're gearing up to do, starting in 2026, no earlier than that, is a field campaign that we're calling Arctic Colors. And so this is going to be, it is our next big field campaign. And the overarching objectives of Arctic Colors is to understand how changes in the Arctic upland and then in the rivers are impacting the nearshore ecosystems. How is the biochemistry changing? How are ecosystem changing? And then how is this trickling up the food web? There's a number of communities that depend on these ecosystems. And so we want to make sure that we understand how that is changing. How is the decreasing sea ice changing all these coastal ecosystems and the charismatic megafauna that we all learn to love. And then what does this mean in terms of future changes? What should we be prepared for? And so it is expected that results from Arctic Colors are going to help us understand and predict better HABs. The Arctic has had always harmful algal blooms. The frequency now, it just happens to be a little bit higher. What are the links of zooplankton to higher trophic levels? And how, with the losing of the ice year after year, how is that changing phytoplankton phenology? And so it's a pretty complex. We are expecting, again, to start in no earlier than 2026. We will be soliciting for Arctic Color science in the next roses. And so that is going to be the last piece of my talk, and it's just going to be resources. And as many of you know, the way in which we solicit science, and we talked about how we write solicitations, and it is based on some of the biggest and most important pressing questions that we have. And another thing that I forgot to mention about the Arctic is one of the things that we're looking for, that we solicited for in ocean biology and biochemistry that we selected last year, are tipping points. So we want to make sure that we are understanding Arctic tipping points. So we got a couple of projects looking at that. So we solicit everything via Roses. It's coming out this week. So look out this Friday for Roses 25 funding opportunity. There should be fun stuff in there for everybody. And this is how we fund all of our science. We do have 2 elements that are still open from Roses 24. This is last year's. The carbon cycle science closes next week. And then we are soliciting for a science team for a field effort that's called Forte. Is a complement to Arctic Colors. It was selected as one of our Earth Venture suborbitals, which is another type of science that we fund, which is a coupling between airborne science and in situ science, which also includes ships. And so Forte is also focused on the Arctic, and it is going to be a strong complement for Arctic Colors. So the two hand in hand hopefully will give us a better understanding of the Arctic. And then we always have rolling deadlines when it comes to rapid response. So if there's something major that happens in the Earth system, major perturbation, and you need to act fast, this is where you would send your proposal. And then if you have workshops or conferences that you would like to kind of put together, that would be the twist that you'd be putting out. So there isn't much there because Roses 25 is about to come out. So yeah, definitely keep your eye out for that. And we're always grateful when people serve on our panels, because that's the only way in which we can evaluate science. So if you wanted to serve on panels, please let us know. We always like to have new people come and help us identify what the best science that we could fund is. And thank you if you already served. There are other engagement opportunities outside of ROSES, and I'm providing an example with EPSCoR. So if you're a colleague, or if you know of a colleague at an EPSCoR state, EPSCoR regularly solicits for different topics, including earth sciences, and so that really is it's another way in which you can find some support to do some pretty amazing science. We have internships, and we love our interns. We stay friends with some of our interns for a long time, and it's really nice to see our interns grow and go to grad school and then get professorships. And it's good to know that they can rely on us for whenever they need a letter of recommendation or anything like that. So we love our interns. And then we also have the NASA postdoctoral program, which provides opportunities 3 times a year for postdocs to come to a NASA center and do NASA relevant science. NASA continues to be a trailblazer when it comes to open science. And this is very important for us. Anything that NASA collects in terms of data is open and free to the public. And we love it when folks come and tell us if there's issues or let us know what amazing science they're doing utilizing NASA data. So we absolutely love open science. And we don't stop collecting data. The satellites are looking at our planet day in and day out, which is extremely valuable. Hopefully I've convinced you of that. And so there's a bunch of ways in which you can look for different types of data. So yeah, we encourage you to just try it out if you haven't. And I think that's it. And it's been an hour.
Hey, thank you. That's great and a lot of good information. And I hope the proposed solicitations and the decadal survey all work out for your program.